Good afternoon, dear guests, dear participants. Thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us at our event today. I would like to greet and to say a special welcome to the speakers, especially those who have flown from other countries to be with us here today. I would like to also thank the European Commission for its support and for hosting our event today. Also Enel and our media partners, Impromedia, Energynomics, Energy Industry Review. We have chosen a topic that is the arch framework for all the other topics that you have heard so many things about lately. But usually they are discussed separately. So we are discussing separately and in a segmented way about e-mobility, transport, or electricity production. And of course, electricity production is the topic that dominates all these discussions about energy transition, about greening our economies, about reducing the CO2 emissions. But all these things, the discussion about buildings, the discussion about transport, the discussion about how we produce and consume electricity and heat, they all fall under this umbrella of the topic of energy transition, which is why we have chosen this topic today, because it involves and includes all of these smaller subtopics that drive the changes in today's societies and economies. Without further ado, I wish you enjoy the program that we have prepared for you, the topics, the speakers, and I would like to invite now our partners for this event, the co-organizers of today's conference, the Institute of Energy for Southeast Europe, to also join me in welcoming you today. Kostis Stambolis.
Thank you very much, Evgenia. Ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers, indeed, it is a great pleasure for us to be here in Bucharest today. We started this as a New Year's idea with Evgenia, and it took us a few months to organize this. But I think we managed to put together the right mix in terms of subjects and speakers. And I have to observe that in view of what's happening today in Europe and globally on the side of climate change and energy needs, it is very topical. I think we could not have chosen a better title. I'm very happy for some of the speakers whom I know, and we participated in the same panels before, like Dr. Theodor Chirica from Foratom, to welcome him, and also to welcome our honorary chairman, John de Cypris, who will chair the first session, and other speakers whom we have met over the past years in various events. So we have a very exciting program, a very compact program, trying to address the burning issues in our region, Southeast Europe. I'm very glad that we have input on nuclear energy, and also we have input on heating and cooling from Mr. Gulev from the IEA Executive Committee, who is the Vice Chairman. And of course, we have Mr. Christopher Neal from the DG Klima, who is going to talk to us, bring us up to date on what's happening. So I won't say any more, just to wish everybody a very useful participation and networking, and I look forward to all presentations. Thank you.
Okay then, let's start the session, the first session. Ladies and gentlemen, you understand that energy transition is the name of the game for the next 10 to 30 years. We're all talking about 30. We keep talking about 50s actually these days. This is a very big thing, not only for Europe actually, it's for all civilized countries around the world. We will keep talking about that, both in terms of policy and in terms of technology as well. Technology will support policy, and policy will support technology as well. So no need to say more. I would like to ask the right person to talk about policy. Mr. Neal, that's right, from EU DG Klima. who I think has the opportunity to develop the policy issues. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let's see the presentation. So, to introduce in parallel myself, I talked to you today on a subject which doesn't concern only DG Climate Action in the European Commission, but as much also DG Energy. We together, and of course the rest of the Commission services, because we together were responsible for what is called the Integrated National Energy and Climate Plans, on which I will talk a few minutes today to give you a flavor of it. You find my details and more details in the presentation, but for now I will focus on just a few elements. It's indeed topical, and I've found particularly interesting that it's a Romanian-Greece collaboration event on Southeast. It's not, I have not come across much about this in recent months, so that's very promising. So let's focus on a few issues. One, let's start with the targets, the whole 2030 framework, the whole setting where we are. I think there is an agreed set of European targets on which I'm certain most of you know, that we have a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by at least 40% domestically. We have the target to achieve a renewable share of 32% European-wide, energy efficiency 32.5% European-wide, and we have an interconnection target of 15%. And of course, also on the funding side, and therefore it's also mentioned, a so-called climate mainstreaming objective, that 1/4 of the budget what the EU spends should have related to climate mitigation, climate adaptation, to name a few. But what is more relevant in this context and for the subject of today is the way how these targets are framed. Because in the 2030 context, it was decided that only the climate targets remain binding. That means that that it's split in a system of the European emissions trading, which binds on the companies and the large industrial producers and power companies, and the rest, it's binding on each member state. So each member state gets a binding target on how to organize emission reductions in the other sectors like transport, building, agriculture. While for the other targets, renewables and efficiency for 2030, it was said it's a European-wide binding target or a European-wide target, but it's not defined what each member states contribute. And that meant there was a need to find a governance mechanism how to achieve that. And the solution was to create a so-called governance regulation on the energy union and climate action, where we said, okay, beyond the streamlining of reporting, we also include a new planning element, which is called Integrated National Energy and Climate Plans, where member states set out how they see their contributions to the European-wide target and also to the other dimension of the energy union, because it's not only about efficiency and decarbonization, but of course also energy security, research, innovation, and the internal market. Now this is, I go quickly over it, that we have 28 draft plans, and that was another novel element in the process to say, okay, as it's a complex and unique exercise, we have a process where first each member state produces a draft, and then we have a stage where it's consulted, where the Commission gives its view, but also other member states, regional cooperation, public consultation, and then we come to a final plan, which is now due by end of this year. And the Commission assessment came in June, and I want just to reflect just a few elements to give you a flavor to look into I think there are more than 500 pages published Commission assessment, but we have also, and that's perhaps more interesting, if you count all the national plans, it's all on WOM's website. You find information about each member state, I think, in a level of granularity and at one place which was never there before. So very briefly, how is the situation on the EU-wide targets? So there we have the situation that overall for the agreed greenhouse gas emission reduction target of at least 40%, it looked already quite good in the draft plans. The problem side was the part where member states are responsible. So the non-ETS, this is transport, buildings, waste, as I said, there we are not yet fully there, but the plans come to 28%. But that should be manageable, let's say. Also on the renewables energy side, we see a gap, I think of up to 1.6%. But again, there's a political process ongoing, and that's the size of a gap where one thinks this is something which should be possible to achieve in this joint process together, that with the final plans together, we achieve the target. Let's say at least the political working is ongoing. And we have the energy efficiency side, and that's perhaps the part where the picture is the least rosy, or the most difficult, because where I see gaps of up to 6% or 6.2%, depending if it's measured in primary or final energy. So that's clearly an element where still more work needs to be done at each member state nearly, and so every member state received recommendations on that one. And jointly, if all together, that's perhaps also important in the current debate, just to be aware, if we would achieve all the targets and the legislation would be implemented, we would be around 45% of emission reductions. Now, I skipped for time Greece. Let's talk a bit about the assessment, some examples, and I use now, in interest of time, only one country. I've prepared also Greece in the presentation, but for now I focus on the home country because I think we have more Romanians than Greek in the audience. So that is a bit the situation where we are for Romania. So we see on the left side, that's the emissions in sectors not covered by the EU emission trading systems. There, by and large, you see the orange one are the targets, and the blue ones are the projections, that more or less Romania is on track. That should be the case because the target is set based on economic criteria, GDP per capita. So it should not be difficult for Romania to achieve that. It's rather the question, can you do more and then perhaps trade with other member states? If we look then to the top of the picture, we have, let's start with the bottom. That's the renewable share in energy consumption. I think that's perhaps the recommendation where the most clearly identified need for, or the Commission recommended Romania to seriously reconsider, because Romania had proposed a target of 27.9%, and the Commission said, according to its analysis and the criteria, it should be at least 34%. So that's perhaps, it's quite a big difference in appreciation. So that's, of course, one of the challenges for Romania here. And then we see, and that's not so much an issue in Greece, but the above issue, efficiency, there it's the assessment is very similar for Greece and Romania, that both are seen as being able to do better. I think we see the graphs, and if you compare where we are, then both member states still see in their plans targets which imply an increase in energy consumption. And the question, if there the efficiency potentials have been sufficiently tapped, and if there are sufficient measures in, that's, I think, the question what the Commission assessment has asked to many member states, as I mentioned, so not only Romania and Greece, but many. I skipped the details, and perhaps a few words on, I think, an element which is quite important, in particular in the region here, the Southeast region, what is called on the just transition. Because of course we know many of the countries here have significant fossil capacities in various states of economic affairs, let's say. And however it is, but when we look in the long term and discussions of carbon neutrality at a certain point, you mentioned the 50-year perspective, so it's clear there is a challenge ahead over time, and the question how to manage the transition, the energy transition in a fair way is a crucial one. So also this was an area where the Commission assessment has provided a number of recommendations. So for Romania, I think a particular highlight was to say, yeah, we know in Romania it's pretty regionally concentrated, the challenge. And so what can you do in mono-industrial regions, how to develop a just transition perspective? And of course, energy poverty is another issue which plays a very relevant role here. And what the social impacts of this is, after all, this energy transition is then the whole economic transition process, if you look at it. And so we always say it needs a whole of government approach. that might be quite challenging, but I think we have seen a good level already of cooperation between ministries in preparation of the plans, which was not there before. So we see it on a good step. Yeah, that figure you can find in the assessment, so I don't go into details on the huge investment needs. And of course, I've put all the possible funding sources also on a slide, but also that is easier to consume on paper than in a quick PowerPoint presentation. Just to mention that as I come from the climate department, there are also quite some funding opportunities which do not depend on the multi-annual financial framework, because typically the debate is often, yeah, we would like to do things, but give us the money, Europe, please. Or can you help us? In the framework of the revision of the EU emissions trading system directive, there's on one side quite relevant auctioning revenues which go to member states, which they can dispose of for funding. And there is a new fund, also a new modernization fund, innovation fund created, where also resources are. And these are in principle clear that it comes. It's now only about the details of implementation. And I will close with a slide, as we are in a workshop on with a regional perspective, of course. The Commission has also, for every member state, given a recommendation on regional cooperation. And here, of course, it's about that what you're currently in practice doing. Let's say, yeah, to talk with the neighbor states, and there's CESEC, of course, the Regional Electricity Coordination Forum. So there, a lot more could be done in this forum. And the good news here, I would say, is that that is something which is not dependent on the end line of the timeline of the plans, because the plans now should be delivered by the 31st of December. But we all know that regional cooperation is a steady and longer term exercise, and will play a crucial role also in the implementation of what is planned, because that's at the end what matters, not what is written in the plans, but also then implemented and gets realized on the ground. And events like this are also helpful, I think, to showing where are the issues which need to be tackled. And with this, I want to close my presentation and open for questions, because unfortunately, I will have to leave after the Q&A directly, because my flight is already soon.
Lester, thank you, Mr. Roos, for putting the plan and the policy issues ahead. Yes, Mr. Nils has to leave just after a few questions. So, can I take questions? Yep, there you are. There you are.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. And there are many reports or analyses that claim that for the EU to reach its 2030 vision and the energy union vision, we would have to get rid of coal entirely in 10 years. And according to the preliminary national energy and climate plans that were submitted, it seems that despite all the ambitious cuts and the commitments to phase out coal from some of the member states, we will still not be at zero coal in 10 years. So I wanted to ask you what the Commission can do. I mean, what measures it has at its disposals? What measures it has at its disposals to incentivize member states to commit, to be more ambitious in this regard, or can it do anything in this respect?
Yes, please.
Well, that's of course a crucial topic in the debates, especially also in the public debates on the topics around. When the first answer, what the Commission has, and was also the EU legislation, is, let's say, we have created a kind of market mechanism which defines a bit this, what is the need or timing for coal phase out, which is called the EU emission trading system, which says what we do there, okay, we take the overall emissions target and translate it in a cap of reduction. It's at the moment it's set at 2.2% each year, whereas it means the emission allocations reduce every year, and with that it gets a price. The current price is now in the area of 25 to 30 euro, so in the area where it starts to matter for the investment decisions. And so that is the mechanism which is the main answer to the question. Let's say that it leaves it in a certain way also. On one side, it's a national prerogative, the fossil fuel supply. It's not the Commission or the European level which can prescribe the energy mix. Then when we look in the treaties, it's pretty clear. On the other hand, we say it's also an economic, like with the emissions trading system, which plays a role. Of course, in any debate about target increases, which is also currently, of course, starting, that the question is often on the agenda because it's, it's a rather a measure which can technically be done in a quicker way than other measures to reduce emissions. But this is, but the social impacts are huge of this. So I think that is something which remains a national strategy how to deal with this. We have seen very different ways how member states treat it. In general, we offer a market-oriented framework in which this can happen, and one would expect that when you have a carbon price, and which is relevant, that then also the economics change. What is the power mix to which? And it's clear that this needs to go further downwards, or beyond 2030 with the existing target. This would go also need further downwards. At a certain point, this would go to zero, and then at a certain point you have no fossil capacity more under this mechanism, but not in the 2030 horizon. So this is
another question. Sorry.
It's good to have a mic right very close to me. Thank you very much. I have a question concerning the Romania submission of the National Energy and Climate Plan, and also the potential for some national governments to try to avoid all these European mechanisms to phase out coal. For example, in the case of Romania, there is now a discussion that coal-fired power plants were justified by Transelectrica recently, 2 weeks ago or something like that, as being vital for the energy security of the country by 2030. This is like a mechanism to prepare for a state aid because these coal-fired power plants are actually making huge losses because of the ETS system. So most of their losses are caused by that, but they are not reducing emissions. So are there mechanisms, I don't know, by DG competition, state aid rules that are going to look specifically into these areas in which countries are going to avoid the climate commitments?
Well, I think we reflect a mechanism to see economically you come in a situation where when the price is there, the carbon price, then you get in difficulties. I cannot comment here on DG competition statements, so sorry there, I will not say furthermore. It shows that the market is working in a certain way, that it puts pressure on then that the most efficient plants are in the market. That would be in a certain way the logical, if the market logic would apply, then you would say, okay, first the most inefficient plants go out and then the most efficient at the end. But of course we know all that is not only an economic consideration, but much more behind. And that's many member states play a crucial role for that. And the Commission has its rules how to deal with this, but I cannot comment on the specific case. What I can still say, because I forgot it on the list of measures, one recommendation in the line what we ask each member state is to list the fossil fuel subsidies in the plans and to have considerations on the phase out of fossil fuel subsidies as part of the final energy and climate plan. So that I forgot still to answer to the first question.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you, Mr. Niels. Any other question?
I'd ask a question about waste to energy. I read that Bucharest building a huge, or want to build a plant in Bucharest, but I also believe that the EU have stopped subsidies regarding waste burning. What is the going forward? What is the EU's stand on this particular issue?
Thanks for the question. I fear I'm not the necessary details behind to have to comment on this specific situation. In general, there was a communication, a Commission communication on waste to energy in the energy union context, in the way how the longer term strategy is, how to deal with this. So there's differentiation. If you can do it, I think you can do it, and there are rules for it, also how you deal with it if it's under the EU ETS. But the other question is indeed, is this something, is still a subject where public funding or could be EU funding could be spent for? There I'm not aware of the details of negotiations, so that are the colleagues who deal with the funding side, so I would need to check that back. Because these are two different issues, if you can operate it or if you should spend money on it to subsidize.
Bucharest is already one of the most polluted regarding air pollution. And it seems to be crazy to sort of add more to it. And, you know, is the EU subsidizing these sort of plants? That's the question.
If you ask it again, I cannot give you more answers you have. I only can say there is also examples of, so at a Danish plant recently, with a kind of, to make this in a very clean way. So also there are technical progresses in that domain. But on the specific case, if there's EU funding involved, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay, because I know they've tested all these supposedly clean waste plants, and they are still highly polluting. Okay.
Would you like to answer or no? Okay. Any other question, ladies and gentlemen? No. So at the end of the day, if I understand correctly, the basic question is how clean is clean, and how just is just transition. And I think yes, those two actually are the basic questions for the whole region, Southeast Europe, which is lagging behind the whole overall transition. And yes, and each country and each place, each state actually tries to develop plans about how clean is clean and at what length of time and the way, what means and investments and technology they are going to use for that. And probably try to find, to interpret this way. The just transition and, of course, the decarbonization of areas, which are very important and coming up very soon to the region. We also, of course, in the region, we all, also everywhere, we all need energy. So we, I think one of the you agree probably, one of the basic question is what is going to be the fuel to be used for transition. And it's also a big discussion and a lot of discussions in SEC and other places about interconnections these days and good regional cooperation, as mentioned. So thank you very much, Mr. Neil.
Thanks.
You are free to fly.
Thanks for the invitation and wish you a productive conference.
And thank you very much, and I hope to be able to get together again. Okay, now talking about greenhouse emissions and renewables and energy efficiency, I think the best example actually in Europe these days is Denmark, and it's a reality. Denmark has managed to decarbonize its economic life, and it's a real achievement of target and showing the way to Europe. So I would like to ask Mr. Kozlov,
yes,
who also has to fly early.
but at 6 o'clock.
All right. Okay, we can manage. We can manage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this event. As mentioned, my name is Lars Gulløv. I'm the CEO of a large district heating company responsible for the district heating supply in the western part of Copenhagen. We buy heat from producers of surplus heat from combined heat and power plants and from waste incineration plants. We have a long tradition about waste incineration plants in Denmark. In fact, the first district heating plant in Denmark was the waste incineration plant built in 1903. We have only a few raw materials in Denmark, and therefore, even for the waste incineration plants, we import at the moment waste from other countries. We have no raw materials from nature. We are good traders, so we import waste and get money together with the waste, and that's a background for why we have cheap district heating in Denmark. I myself, I'm living 700 meters from a waste incineration plant. I've been living there since 1985. I don't know if I'm spoiled, but you can come back to that after my presentation. The agenda for this afternoon, huge topics. We have got a new government in Denmark, so I'll just give you a short introduction to what they call their letter of understanding. Then I'll give you a short introduction to what's the situation about the green transition in Denmark. And then a specific case giving you an impression of how do we in fact move from visions to action. How do we cooperate between companies, municipalities, regions to reach the targets we have set? This government, they have set up this letter of understanding, where the primary point here is that they have decided to make a binding climate law, which will be presented in the first year of their work, probably before Christmas this year. So that's only half a year. It's ambitious, as you can see here, that the goal is to reduce the CO2 emissions with 70% in 2030 compared with the emissions in 1990. And this is to ensure that we can meet the requirements from the Paris Agreement. We also put focus on the transport sector, because that's probably the largest challenge in society. And the government, they have an idea to make it forbidden to sell cars driven by diesel or petrol in 2030. If that's in conflict with the regulations from the European Union, I don't know, but we will see. But if it's not allowed to stop for the sale, we have a transition in Denmark that we can work with different kinds of taxes which motivate the people to buy the equipment which the politicians want us to buy. We also put, wow, it was very quick. Just go back here slowly. To put focus on the transport sector and put more focus on public transport and also bicycles, better solutions in the cities to get from point A to point B by using a bicycle instead of using a bus. And then also to look at a sustainable air transport with green fossil fuels for the airplanes. Also, the agriculture sector will be put on focus, and there will be set up aid as a tool for this transformation, so there will be less emissions from the agriculture sector. And then a land reform where we change areas which we today use for agriculture purposes, change it into what you could call good old nature. More trees, more forest. A climate action plan split up in 8 points. Energy efficiency in public buildings, a national strategy for sustainable buildings, a strategy for how we can introduce electricity in the transport sector, in the industry and the society in general, and I will come back to that, what the consequences there is for the district heating sector, and then more funding for green research. We will see if it's possible, together with countries around the North Sea, to even extend the amount of offshore wind power turbines, together with Germany and UK. Also, if they are not member of the UK later, we don't know. And also investigate the possibilities to build an artificial, you could call it energy hub, out in the North Sea, with a combination of wind turbines and other kinds of electrical power, probably photovoltaic, with a capacity of 10 gigawatt. More forest, as I mentioned, and then as a consequence of increasing sea level, to see how we can protect our coasts. We have more than 7,000 kilometers of coastline. So the situation, since 1990, we have been able to reduce our CO2 emissions with 40%. And at the same time, we have been able to keep the gross energy consumption at an almost stable level, a small reduction. All these figures, they are from the Danish Energy Agency, so it's not a vision, it's a reality. We have set up this target, or the government have set up this target, a CO2 reduction of 70% in 2030. Come on. Now it's locked. Good. The development in the emissions of CO2 reduced from 61 million tons in 1990 to now 39 million tons. So you can see the primary reduction, it's on the gray part here, that's the phasing out of coal. Power plants, they have changed from coal to natural gas or from coal to biomass. The share of renewable energy, we have the development here, the production of energy based on biomass. Here we have the electricity from the wind turbines, and then a small part coming from biogas and others. And if we look at the share of renewables in according to the EU method of calculation, we have now around 35% of all energy consumption in Denmark based on renewable energy. It looks different in the paper copy. I don't know why it's okay. The driver for the green transition, that's the price for CO2. And as mentioned in the presentation before, the actual price is around 25 euro per ton. In this period here, with very low prices for CO2 emission, it has not been motivating to change from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But with this trend, and of course I hope it will continue, it will motivate utilities to change from fossil fuels as coal, natural gas and oil to renewable energy. It can be different to compare energy prices from one country to another. So I tried to set up from the green account in our company, and we are here in Denmark, in the eastern part of Denmark, and we are responsible for the district heating supply in the blue area. So what's shown here is the district heating price at end user level to our customers, local distribution companies, and then you have the natural gas price here for the consumers if they use natural gas instead of using district heating. So in general, in Denmark, district heating is cheaper than natural gas, and that's a consequence of the tax policy set by the government. To compare the costs, because this seems to be very huge amounts of money, I have tried to calculate that if you take a standard family in Denmark and look at their net income, that means what they have after paying tax, they spend around 10% of their net income for heating, domestic hot water, and electricity. So that percent you can compare with the situation in Romania. If we just take the actual price, you have to take into account that we have high prices in Denmark, we have high taxes, and we have high salaries. But 10% for a standard family, they spend 10% of their net income for heating, domestic hot water, and electricity. The development of district heating, it should be obvious that it's a success. 32% of all houses, dwellings, were supplied with district heating in 1984. Today it's 64%. And it's still increasing. District heating is more and more green. You can see the green part here. More and more district heating production is based on renewable energy. The part here, the gray one, that was coal used at the combined heat and power plants primary, and that it's more or less phased out today. We have only a small amount of oil here, and then we have some energy from waste incineration plants. To drive this transition, it's necessary to cooperate. And therefore we have started in Denmark in all regions, and we have only 5 regions. In each region we have started what we call a strategic energy planning. This is a picture of the capital region with around 1.8 million inhabitants. And the energy consumption, how it's split up today in the region, you can see here, 40% for heating, 40% for transport, and only 20% for electricity. So if we want to reduce the amount of CO2 emission, it's necessary that we both focus on heating and also transport. The capital region, they want to be, the politicians want region to be the leading region for green transition and growth. Not in Denmark, but in Europe. That's very ambitious. They have set the target that in 2035, the region should be based on non-fossil fuels for heating and electricity. So that means 100% CO2 neutral heating and transport in 2035. In 2050, also the transport sector will be included. Such an strategic energy planning, that's a work across borders. Therefore, we have named this project Energy Across Borders, meaning across borders between municipalities, between regions, between companies. We are companies involved in district heating and natural gas, in waste and electricity, and between sectors also, heating, process, and transport. If you don't look at the total society, you will not be able to reach the targets we have set. And all this work, it respects the Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations. That's the participants. So you can imagine what job it is to start a project where 33 municipalities, 10 utilities, some of them in competition with each other, the capital region, and then we have a project organization to steer the project. But that's the project we have started. We started at 4 years ago, and we have now started phase number 3. Phase number 2, it ended last year with a roadmap for 2025, setting up guidelines for what we can do until 2025. And all these publications, 22 publications covering all different areas in such a strategic energy planning, putting focus on electricity consumption, how to handle waste, how to optimize the transport sector, how to make the transition for the district heating companies. Until now, it's only in Danish. But this roadmap, it's put focus on initiatives concerning district heating and combined heat and power production, the heat supply, electricity system, natural gas system, transport system, and energy savings. And then I'll put focus on the first one here, because that's relevant for our company already now. So there we have 7 different areas of interest. We have the integration of solar heating. It can be difficult in a large city because you have no free areas. Development and implementation of large heat pumps, expansion of geothermal energy, utilization of waste capacity, common definition of parameters for security of supply, conversion of peak and reserve load boilers to renewable energy, and large-scale heat storages. And actually, at the moment, our company, we are involved in these 4 activities already now. If we go to the great or large heat pumps, we took research and development projects into operation here at the beginning of this year, placed in the harbor of Copenhagen, where we utilize surplus heat from seawater and sewage water to test the technology before we extend it to many of these kind of installations. We have geothermal energy. We started a pilot project here back in 2002. We have realized that if we want to extend the amount of geothermal energy, it's necessary that we open the market for professional actors. Therefore, we have given our concession back to the Danish Energy Agency. They have called for tenders for private companies to go into that kind of business, and to them they have, I just need 2 minutes, they have submitted tenders. So what we're going now before Christmas is that we will sign a letter of intent with 1 or 2 of these companies, because we look at biomass as a renewable energy source we will use for the next 10 or 15 years. Then we have to reduce the consumption of biomass and put in instead geothermal energy. Conversion of peak and reserve load boilers, they have been based on a heavy fuel oil, light oil, and natural gas before. We will stop by using fossil fuels for them and convert them to biofuel, to electric boilers, or to green gas. That means biogas. And we have just started the construction of a large pit storage, a hole in the soil filled up with 70,000 cubic meters of hot water. And this pit storage, it will be loaded and reloaded between 25 and 30 times a year, making it possible to utilize cheap heat when it's available, and then we can reload the storage at times where the heat demand is larger than the actual base load heat production, and by that we can save more expensive heat production from peak load boilers. The payback time for the peak storage is less than 10 years. Summary: this green transition, it will not stop. Not tomorrow because it's Friday or next month or Christmas. It's an ongoing process. It's very important that you set up understandable and clear visions and goals for such a transition. It's very important that the political level, they are involved from the beginning. They are key to continue resources, to allocate resources to the project. And then information and communication about what you are doing and why you are doing it is essential. Otherwise, you will never succeed with that, and you will never get support from the population to this transition because it costs money. It's not free of charge. So, that was a quick introduction to what we are doing, and it works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gulev. Very, very interesting, actually. It's true that Denmark is leading the way to decarbonization. Has done a lot of work and a lot of research, and it's a big effort these days, which is true. And now, how about some questions? Let's have some questions. A lady, gentlemen? Oh, yes? Yes, please.
Hello. You said that district heating and cooling is cheaper because of governmental policies and prices. In reality, economically, is it cheaper? And how sustainable is the district heating system? Meaning in crisis, when you need more energy or more utilities, is the renewable or the mix of energy is enough to ensure the necessary utility? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We have since the end of the 1970s in Denmark had energy taxes. They were introduced by the politicians after the two energy crises we had in 73 and 79 to motivate the people to reduce the energy consumption. So the energy taxes, they were at that time used as an incentive to, or you can see a stick to motivate the people to reduce energy consumption, and the income from these energy taxes, it was spent for financing grants for the population so they could reduce their energy consumption. So it was a closed circuit where the income was spent for grants so people could get grants for insulating their houses better, installing new windows, new water tanks, new roofs, or whatever it was. So we have in Denmark used taxes as an incentive to motivate people to act in the direction the politicians wanted. And the background for that was that back in the 1970s, we were for more than 90% dependent on imported oil. And when the oil supplies from the Middle East and from Iran, Iraq were cut off, people realized and the politicians realized that access to cheap energy is not what we can expect in the future. So therefore it has been accepted by the population that the taxes, they were used to ensure that we would reach the targets which was necessary for the society. So therefore the taxes, they are used in different ways. So we have different size of taxes on different fuels. So for instance, it's relatively expensive today to use coal because we want to make a change from coal to more sustainable energy. We have invested a lot of money in the development of wind turbines, started back in the 1970s, and we have huge producers of wind turbines today in Denmark, exporting to all over the world. So I think it's necessary that if you want to develop a society, it's necessary that the politicians, they take responsibility for the leadership of a society. Otherwise, you will not have this transition, because it's my opinion that the market will not ensure that you will fulfill your targets. The second question, it was about sustainability of district heating. I can see that the biomass we use in Denmark, it's respect all the international standards concerning sustainability. And if the standards are, if they could be better, probably they could. And if they are strengthened, the specifications, we will follow them. We are not interested, and the owners of the forests, they are not interested in making a quick, short business. They want to go into this area with supply biomass to the society. At the moment, it's primarily biomass used for producing heat, but we see it as we are helping to build up a production capacity for biomass, which in the future can be used in the transport sector. And then we move out, and then we go into the geothermal energy instead. So we are building up a market. If there's no consumers or buyers of biomass, there will be no producers. So we are building up this market, a production capacity, and a market for buying the biomass, and then we are moving out in 15 years, 10 years. So we are respecting all the conditions set by the International Society about sustainability. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. You said in your presentation that district heating and combined heat and power, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Is it possible to give us a very short overview of the cogeneration status in Denmark? We know that before it was leading the way. What is happening now, the last 5, let's say, years? Thank you.
See, the situation in Copenhagen is that all the combined heat and power plants, they have converted from fossil fuels to biomass. As the newest one, it will go into operation here in December. It's based on wood chips. Then we have waste incineration plants with the most modern technology, covering around 30% of the total heat demand in the greater Copenhagen region. If we go outside Copenhagen, we have had a lot of small district heating schemes where the district heating has been based on combined heat and power production from gas engines. But these gas engines, they are closing down because the subsidies to them, it has ended at the end of 2018. And these district heating systems, they are now going in production technologies as heat pumps, as electric boilers, or solar energy. We have larger district heating systems, even in Denmark, where we utilize the solar heating in combination with large-scale seasonal storage facilities, meaning that more than 50% of the total heat demand in the district heating companies supply area can be covered by solar heating.
So actually, cogenerated electricity is going down.
It's going down because we have more electricity production from wind turbines. And some days we have even more electricity production from wind turbines than we need.
It's electrification.
Yeah.
Other question? Yes, Mr. No, yes. Okay.
Colin Wild. Can you give us some details about the correlation between renewables, especially wind, and storage?
Yes. At the moment, the moment, the primary part of the surplus electricity production, it's exported to Germany. And the challenge there is that the primary part of the German wind turbine production is from the same area of the North Sea as we have it in Denmark. And that means that when we want to export cheap electricity to Germany, there's a bottleneck in the northern part of Germany because the renewable electricity production in Germany is in the northern part of Germany, and the electricity consumption is in the southern part. So they need to extend their electricity grid to move electricity from the northern part to the southern part. And that's a challenge in Germany because no people want this grids through their areas. So they are hit, but by what we call the NIMBY effect, never in my backyard effect. So they need to build at least 1,000 kilometers on transmission network, and they build 40 kilometers a year. So that's a challenge for us. So therefore we have periods with cheap electricity, and that's interesting for the district heating sector because that cheap electricity can be used in electrical boilers, and then we can put the electricity you can see from the electrical boilers to the storage facilities. So if we want that size of electricity production as we have from wind turbines, it's necessary that we made a system integration between the power system and the district heating system, because the cheapest way to store electricity, that's as hot water.
Okay, Mrs. Buzilov.
I'm very glad that you are among one of our speakers today because, unfortunately, in my country, district heating, termoficare in Romanian, has all but become a dirty word. Citizens have lost their confidence in this system, and some actually want the system to disappear, to go away, and so that we switch only to individual heating solutions. What would you say to those people, let's say in Romania, who say that district heating is a solution that works in the Scandinavian region only, that it's suitable only for that region? That's question number one. And the second question, because you outlined that Denmark, yes, it has higher incomes, higher taxes. Romania has lower levels of incomes. We also have a significant subsidies, so the price of heat is subsidized for up to 60% in Romania. And I was wondering how Denmark, because I'm trying to compare, how do you deal with the vulnerable customers? For instance, those clients that for some reason may found themselves in a situation in which they are, unable to pay their heat bill for the winter. Is there a special price, subsidized price? Do you disconnect them, or what are the mechanisms in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are not allowed to disconnect them. We have many years ago, and I've also discussed that topic back in the Czech Republic back in 1996, that if you want to if you want to have a district heating sector which can operate without losses, it's necessary that you separate your energy policy with your social policy. Because some people, they can afford to pay the bill. So if you just give subsidizes in general to district heating, you will in fact make what I call a reverse Robin Hood, meaning that you take money from the poor people and give it to the rich. If you have a real cost district heating price at that level, some of the inhabitants, many of the inhabitants, they can pay the bill. And then in Denmark, we give subsidizes to the people who can't pay. Yeah. Also to retired people. So they can get what we call a heat help. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir. Now it's another question, and that's the last question because we have to. I have another one.
No, she had also another question. The first one, whether district heating is still viable not only for Denmark but also for this part of the world. So.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I won't go into specific political discussions in another country, but in Denmark we have looked at it in that way that if we want this green transition of society, it's necessary that we ensure that we have this district heating network, because it's a precondition for utilizing the low-hanging fruits in society concerning surplus heat from industries, surplus heat from supermarkets, surplus heat from, which is on the top of the agenda in Denmark today, surplus heat from data centers. All this kind of surplus heat with temperatures between 40 and 60 degrees C, you will not be able in society to utilize these resources if you don't have an infrastructure in the form as a district heating system. Furthermore, you can connect solar heating to it from solar collectors. You will see that in many smaller cities in Denmark where there is space enough for setting up the fields with solar collectors. So you can utilize these free energy resources. I don't know if you can do it or will do it in Romania, but we do that with success. Then it's maybe also interesting for you to know that the way we have organized the district heating sector in Denmark is quite different compared to what you see in all other countries. Most of the district heating companies, they are cooperatives owned by the district heating consumers. So they are not owned by the municipalities, they are owned by the district heating consumers. Like farmers 100 years ago in Denmark joined together and established freezing houses or slaughterhouses or dairies as cooperatives. And it functions in Denmark because the initiatives to these cooperatives, it came from the roots. So the district heating consumers, they own their own district heating company. By that way, you feel that you are a part of it. You can even be elected as chairman of the company if you want. Yes, so if you want to utilize low-hanging fruits in society, utilize these resources, it's necessary that you have a well-functioning district heating system. Without that, the resources will be just lost to a society.
Okay.
Okay. Speaking about competitiveness between district heating, centralized system versus individual system, I want to understand the difference of price of gas, CHP, compared to individual system, and if individual system in Denmark pay pollution tax or pollution prices, something like that, because cogeneration in Romania pays a lot carbon certificates, and I want to understand if pollution from individual heating solutions pay the price or not, speaking about competitiveness. Thank you.
Yes, the individual houses using natural gas, they pay a CO2 tax at the top of the gas price, which is equivalent to the size of the CO2 certificates that the producer of combined heat and power pays. So we have made a balance there.
pay for the ETS. Yes, understandable.
Don't tell
I'll-
this to the Romanian authorities. Make it a secret between us.
I will leave the country today.
Remember, you are not alone.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. New. I think we can conclude this stage the questions. And from beautiful Copenhagen to our region again. I think now it's time to ask Mr. Kostis Tabalis from the Institute of Energy of Southeast Europe talk about the region and where we stand. Do not dare to compare Copenhagen with Southeast.
Yes, Yanis, we're back to a region with not a very rosy outlook. We are a little jealous of what's happening in Denmark. But don't forget that in Denmark, political parties, although they have great differences between them, they always make a deal at the end. And I think they put the national priorities and target ahead of everything. And there's a modus vivendi between them, and they have survived many years. And I think Denmark is an example not only on the energy field, but on political management. And unless Denmark had good political management over the last few years, I don't think it would have been to the stage it is today. I have great respect for Denmark. I visited Denmark once. I visited most of your energy installations. And many years ago, 15 years ago, you were already using biomass for power generation. And I was really, really impressed, but huge power. I mean, we're talking about 250, 300 megawatt units very near Copenhagen. So yes, Denmark is very advanced on this. And I think it is an example, and I'm glad for Mr. Gunyev's presence here, because yes, we have something to compare and aspire to. Now, talking about energy in a region, I think it is important also to have the global perspective. I will try and be very brief, and I will inevitably skip a number of slides because we are running behind schedule. So it is important to understand the global energy mix and the global energy forces, because don't forget that our region, that is the east part of the Balkans, the west part, south, north, we are very dependent on inflows of energy. We are very important on imports. Romania, of course, a lot less so, because Romania is one of the few countries in the region that has substantial energy resources of its own, oil, and of course gas. But all the rest, all the other countries, I think they are net importers, and what's happening in the global area is very important to us. So if we compare 1990 to 2017, we see very little change in terms of lessening the dependence on fossil fuels. And because all the debate over the last few months has been really on lessening the dependence on fossil fuels, and it was not just coal. I mean, we have taken that is out of the energy mix. It's a foregone conclusion for most countries and most people. We're talking about oil, which is under pressure, and now lately environmentalists are talking of really getting rid of gas. So the question is arising as to how will our energy systems and electricity systems going to operate. And we see here how difficult it is to change the energy mix. I mean, we have renewables, 7.7% 1990, and what is this renewables? It's really biomass in the developing countries, and very little solar and wind. And then we're going ahead to our present era, and we're seeing 10.5. And again, most of this is biomass, large hydro, and a little solar and wind, which is coming into the. And then we see the nuclear portion getting less. And don't forget that nuclear is emission-free. So the global, the change, the energy transition that many latter-day prophets are promising us is not going to be an easy affair. And we see here what has been happening over the last 20 or so years. Growing use of coal, which is the top one. Solar and wind have started coming slightly into the picture. Nuclear, then we have gas, more gas, and then we have slight increase on oil, and it's sort of looking as to be stabilizing, but not as we will see in a few minutes. So we have greater consumption, greater needs, but we have the traditional fuel sources to serve these needs. And these are the scenarios by BP, and of course IEA has similar scenarios. And if we want to go to what the European Union is suggesting, we're going to go to the rapid transition by 2040, 2050, which means a lot less oil, less coal, and more gas, and a little more nuclear. Now, right. Inevitably, there's going to be a gap between primary demand and carbon emissions. And now we come to the EIA scenario, which is, I think, very explicit in what is going to happen under different scenarios. And we see here that in 2017, let's say in our time, 81%, the fossil fuel share was 81%. And now if you consider the various scenarios from the current policies, which is really business as usual, the new policies, which is a little less dependent on coal, and the sustainable development, which is more or less full decarbonization policies, we see the share dropping, in variation between 60% and 78%. Now, what does this mean? That fossil fuel, that is coal, gas, and oil, are still going, in the best scenario, to correspond to the biggest part of the energy mix. So I think this is the very pragmatic approach under the various scenarios, and we have to bear this in mind, especially in a region where we're so much oil and gas energy dependent. Going to the oil demand, 2019 is a very important year because for the first time, global oil consumption has peaked on 100 million barrels a day. And the projections are that this is going to increase to about 115, 120. So oil consumption is not going down, it's going up. And the Shell company scenario is suggesting that we're going to have a peak demand by 2015, 2030, and it's going downwards, and at the same time we have renewables share growing. So this is another view of what's going to happen, but we see that we have a few years ahead of us where we're going to be highly dependent on fossil fuels. And of course, oil companies, which means also gas companies, are very concerned because under this type of scenarios, they are going to end up with stranded assets. Now, why I'm talking about oil companies? I'm talking about oil and gas companies because these are the companies who have the know-how, the management, the finances to help us go through the energy transition. Rather than fighting against oil and gas companies, I think we have to work with oil and gas companies. They are very important players. They have tremendous experience, and once convinced, and it seems so that most of them are convinced, they are going to help in the energy transition process. Speaking about a region, we see the countries in blue, which our institute covers, which is West Balkans, the East, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Israel, and then we have the peripheral countries. These are the countries with which we exchange energy. We have energy flows. So it's important to know what's happening. And some of the key regional issues as we have identified them is, first, we have a marked divergence between EU and Southeast energy strategies. That is, the energy strategies that are applied by national governments differ to what EU has been targeting until very recently. 2019, 18 and 19 was a very important years because the European Union insisted on the introduction by each country of a uniform type of energy strategy. So there was a template from Brussels that all countries had to abide, and that was the energy and climate strategy. And that was a very serious and consistent effort trying to harmonize energy policies across the region. So it took several years to arrive at this very common and very useful tool to try to get all the countries to agree on certain common practice and methodology to achieve a certain type of strategy. So we're a little far off of what are the targets and what is happening on the ground in Southeast Europe, including Romania, Greece, Bulgaria, and all the countries we're going to talk about. Another important matter to bear in mind is that Southeast Europe is more energy security vulnerable than the rest of Europe because of the great import dependence. So energy supply diversification in our region is less important than security of energy transportation and transmission. We have high hydrocarbon dependence. Electricity's newcomer gas alters the supply balance. More and more gas is coming into for power generation. At the same time, there's a lack of adequate electricity and gas interconnections, with lots of plants underway and projects now under construction. So by 2025, this will have been ameliorated, so we'll have a much better grids in terms of electricity and gas. Coal is and will continue for some time to be relevant, and I will explain to this in a minute. So Southeast Europe's path towards decarbonization is going to be difficult and uncertain. And as far as analysis shows, nuclear remains a viable option for Southeast Europe power generation. Renewables energy growth is impeded due to policy failures, financial, regulatory, and also in terms of market operation. And we've seen this very clearly a few years ago, where in Romania, in Bulgaria, in Greece, almost simultaneously, the whole renewable energy market collapsed. Why did it collapse? Because of high prices, high tariffs, and because of the inability of the state coffers to cover the payments they had to make to the electricity, the auto electricity producers. So it was a clear EU policy. And I'm sorry that our dear colleague from EU has left, because I wanted him to hear that. Anyway, this is being changed. And hopefully the new type of market operation will have integrated renewables, and it is integrated, no doubt. Therefore, we're going to see again a growth. But let's not have any fantasies that renewable energies is going to really advance very fast and is going to solve all our problems. Our analysis does not show this. And at the same time, we have to deal with energy poverty. And of course, it's very interesting, your presentation on district heating, because I think it provides an important aspect and answer to the energy poverty aspect in a region. As we're saying, we have great import dependence. As you see here, Greece is one of the highest, Turkey, of course, Romania a lot so, but other countries like Bulgaria are very dependent, and so forth. So this is not a very satisfactory picture. And most of these countries are trying to discover oil and gas resources at a time where policy and the markets are turning against oil and gas. So this is a problem we will have to deal with. And here is the situation as far as hard coal and lignite is concerned in a region. And we see here that in terms of production and imports, what is the situation? These figures are based on Eurocoal. So our region is very highly dependent still on coal. Now, there are plans and there are policies which have been announced for doing away with coal. We have a recent announcement by the Greek Prime Minister saying that by 2028, no lignite, which is the local type of coal, is going to be used for power generation. It is easier said than done, because cutting off lignite production is going to upset the economies of several regions which depend on this for many years, for decades. So unless this is followed by policies in terms of social support to the local communities and trying to find new types of occupation for inhabitants, this is not going to happen that easily. And of course, we see here the electricity share from coal in West Balkans, which is in Ukraine and the EC, which is still very, very, very high. And of course, we see here how the carbon costs are featuring already very highly in the total electricity production cost in the countries which depend on coal for power generation. And a very clear example was what's happened in our own incumbent company, Public Power Corporation, which is almost went bankrupt because the amount of money they had to pay for CO2 emissions shot up, and it meant 300 million loss in about less than 9 months. So this is a serious thing, and of course the market operation is affecting the change towards decarbonization. And here are the incentives for electricity production from renewables compared to coal subsidies, and here we see that we don't have enough incentives. The picture, how fast the CO2 emissions costs have risen, and of course this is the market way to help and accelerate decarbonization. But the market way is very expensive, and it will be up to the companies to be able to adjust to use less coal. And of course, this applies to Greece, to Bulgaria, to Romania, to Croatia, who are part of the EU, but does not apply to West Balkans, which are going to retain coal for some years to come. I will skip this, trying to go to the very end. I'm very aware that we are running short of time. We have what we call an inverted pyramid arrangement in Southeast Europe compared to pursued official energy union policies and stated targets, as economic development at all costs remains #1 priority for most countries. So there's not such a big economic urge to develop renewables and promote. Also, the approach to decarbonization does not include obvious solutions such as CCS, CSU provision. It does not include nuclear, which is an obvious solution to minimize your losses. And it does not include massive input of funds to develop, upgrade, and extend national electricity grids. And here we see the situation across the region, where we have a number of new coal-fired plants under construction and some other ones which have been permitted. So the the region is not really moving so fast out of coal. And the incentives are not there, and the money is not there from the EU to support such policies. So let's not fool ourselves that we are going to achieve decarbonization in Southeast Europe in 10 or 15 years. And here we see the anticipated energy investments in Greece over the next few years and the corresponding ones for Romania. You'll have this in the presentations. I won't talk to this. I'll go to the very end. So until now, we had market integration, liberalization as being the key drivers of energy policy in the region. This has now changed. We have the COP21, the Paris Agreement targets, and this will now be number one in terms of energy policies in the region. The transition to decarbonized power generation is not an easy regional issue, as in most of the Southeast Europe countries, electricity generation, which is mainly based on coal and lignite, supports thousands of jobs, so we have a big social issue here. And large-scale renewable energy development can contribute towards improving the energy security situation. So we have every interest to develop RES, but what we are arguing is that we don't have clear policies, we don't have clear incentives, and it cannot only be done by market mechanisms if we want to be true to the goals that have been set and are going to very soon be revised to even higher goals for 2050. So we are arguing that the present policies promoted by EU are grossly inadequate to the targets which have been put for decarbonization. And therefore, national governments have to come up with suggestions, with pressure, and they also have to deal with an environmental lobby which doesn't care about the local economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kostas. Thank you, Kostis. Very interesting presentation about the region and the priorities. Yes, transition is a long way. It's not a one-day trip. So, questions? Yes, sir.
In context of your presentation, what would be the ideal energy mix for Southeast Europe in general?
You're asking me to prophetize. I think
Well,
the best energy mix for Southeast Europe will be very near to the current and proposed energy mix of Romania. Romania has one of the most balanced energy mixes across the region. It has nuclear, it has gas, it has renewables, and it has coal, which is not hugely big in the overall energy mix, so it can afford to phase it out without causing any big social unrest. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other question? No question? No. So what is the problem? Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Because so, if I got it correctly, seeing state by state, the current mix is okay. So what is wrong?
No, the current mix is not okay. I
But at the end of the
disagree
day,
on that.
At the end of the day, the production mix, you said, well, that's what I read, unless I read it wrong. The generation mix is more or less balanced.
I won't say. Romania, we have in our survey of Southeast Europe, Eugenia and I cooperated very well. Eugenia covered the Romanian part, but she was also peer reviewer for We covered the energy balances and bits of 13 countries, and the next year we'll be covering 15 countries. So in the big diversification divergence between the energy mix of the various countries. Romania, out of all the countries, has the most balanced mix because it has nuclear, it has gas, all that, and can develop also more gas for decarbonization, and can also develop more nuclear. So, but the other countries are not as lucky because they don't produce their own gas or oil. They are almost all of them oil dependent and gas dependent, like Greece. And others like Albania, they have their own, Albania, they are very much dependent on hydropower, and they have not diversified enough their economy. So in all other countries, especially West Balkans, are very coal dependent. They don't have gas grids.
Okay, got it wrong.
Yeah.
I didn't involve the West Balkans.
Yes.
No. West Balkans, a different story. It will take much longer. Okay. Now, talking about transition, we have to say a few words about fuels. What is the fuel that will assist the transition, the energy transition? IEA says it's gas, but I have here a gentleman who's already over there. Mr. Chirika, who will kindly tell us whether nuclear energy actually can be a transition.
Good afternoon. I'm very glad to be here to represent the nuclear sector. So I try to make an European overview based on my current position in non-governmental organization as president of the European Atomic Forum. At the end of the day, I can start and end my presentation with this slide. I say that renewable together with nuclear energy will be the backbone of a carbon-free Europe power system, which is the main conclusion of the EU communication, A Clean Planet for All, that is supported by a strategy of about 400 pages, evaluating 8 paths to go to the targets for 2050. But of course, I have also to sell my story, so I try to be as quick as possible because to let Totilia to have some time for her presentation. So that disclaimer is an experience that we have with the presentation they use by a promoter to advertise a future conference where Foratom was not yet registered. So practically that we decided to put that disclaimer. So Foratom is the lobby organization of nuclear industry in Brussels. We have 15 national forums members and 2 corporates members. So nuclear is 126 reactors in operation with a turnover of about 100 billion euros per year, 1,100,000 jobs, 26% of the electricity production in the EU, and 50% of the low carbon electricity produced in EU. The key topics we are tackling energy policy, nuclear technology and communication. There is a system of working groups and practically we are producing position papers and practically we are feeding and informing the European institutions and also the member states about the nuclear industry as part of this story. Worldwide, of course, I do not repeat, that is an evolution. There is a nice animation, but it's quite long and difficult to connect. So practically I extracted relevant years. And you may see how the increase of the CO, the carbon equivalent emissions practically to 2017, where we noticed huge releases in China, India, Russia, and the United States. And of course, Germany is the champion of Europe in releases, is the largest production of carbon, followed by Poland. But Poland is in a sad situation, and practically they have no other solution for the next future. Fortunately for Germany, the energy event, there was a failure until now. So that in the world we may notice that the largest production of electricity is in Western Central Europe and North America. Of course, we notice the evolution in Asia, focusing mainly in China. There is, how to settle the pointer? Yeah, yes. So practically that is the effect of Fukushima, but after that they notice that is quite an increase of the electricity production in the world, but it's mainly due to the Asian and also Russian projects all over the world. Of course, the champions are Americans, followed by France, China, Russia, Korea, Canada, Ukraine is the biggest nuclear countries. There are evolutions. I have no time to comment on that. However, the United States, they realize that they are losing the position as leader in the world. So now practically the actual administration is committed to review and revitalize the nuclear industry. And just recently, the French government asked EDF to prepare to have 6 large EPRs, 1,600 megawatts each, in operation by 2035 to compensate the retirement of an equivalent fleet of reactors. There is a role of nuclear in reaching the climate change targets, and this role is demonstrated by serious organization. For us, for the nuclear industry, the IPCC report is the most valuable report because IPCC was never a supporter, a friend of nuclear. And IPCC realized that without nuclear, of course, as a part of the solution with renewable, that they can find nuclear in all the scenarios, and that is no solution to go there. And it's another story about the risk. It's the nuclear risk, the nuclear accidents are equivalent with air crashes. They are very spectacular, but the casualties are not. You cannot compare casualties in aviation compared with what is on the outdoor routes. So they say in the 4th section of the report that health risks are low for nuclear per unit of electricity production, and the land requirements is lower than that of other power sources. Of course, that IEA has a very solid report. It's no time to go through. IEA is also a report they produced last year. Very interesting is the report was launched during the Dubai conference of World Energy Council regarding the role of nuclear in energy transition. The last IEA International Conference on Climate Change also was focused on the role of the nuclear power. And just, of course, it's no time to go through some statements. That is Fatih Birol, the executive director of IEA, is Cornel Ferruțo, Romanian, is IEA acting director general. In this seems there's good chance to become the next director general of the agency. Is Ho Sung Lee, that's the chair of IPCC, and of course now is a lobbyist. Agneta is a lobbyist. Is the director general of All Nuclear Association. So what is nuclear in the energy policies? I'm not I started in fact with the A Clean Planet for All report, and the in-depth analysis, that's the backup for the main conclusion of this strategy that was offered by the Commission for the discussions regarding the future of the energy system in Europe. There are projects in EU on new builds. Some of them are quite delayed and over budget, and the explanation is okay. I cannot compete with you, so okay, you do that. Okay, so. So, in fact, the explanation is that that disconnection of the new build created a gap of skills, capabilities, knowledge transfer. So, practically, it's quite difficult to rebuild and to put back on track the construction. But now we expect that still in EU, UK, with Hinkley Point to prove that already this reactor is no more a first of a kind. There are intentions to build in other countries, including Romania, and of course that the map of what is projects. It's a discussion, also the EU documents, but not only the IEA document, they are insisting on the role of life extension, of rehabilitation and life extension of the existing plants, because practically in order to maintain the role of nuclear for a medium-term period of time, practically we need to invest better in life extension, which is cheaper and more efficient, economical. So with blue, we have here we have with blue with blue is the decline of the existing fleet is nothing do. With orange is the life extension, LTO, and practically is that in the transition is in the first part of transition. This is they have an important role, and after that is the large baseload units combined with advanced nuclear technology of small, medium modular reactors type with higher flexibility. So I do not insist on the advantages of LTO. Just remember that economical they are efficient economically, but of course they cannot be a long-term solution. It's quite difficult to reimagine life extension after life extension after life extension. That is a sort of eternal life that is not possible in this world. So an important challenge you are focusing is regarding the financing, sustainable development. And here, following the communication of the Commission financing sustainable development and action plan to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees is the quite interesting regulation, so-called taxonomy regulation. And that is, there are another two regulations that are not so important. This is very important. And there is on the wording proposed by the Commission, there were interventions in the Parliament, and of course that the two committees, the ICON and the INVI, they removed in the whole text the climate nuclear energy replacing with renewable energy, that practically is harming any future development of new nuclear build and advanced nuclear technologies. So, of course, that in the moment when it was a COREPER meeting and they discussed to prepare the mandate for the Council, practically the Council put back on track the wording of the Commission. Of course, that it was an opposition from Germany, Austria, Luxembourg, and also an oral remark from Greece. But of course, they cannot create a blocking minority. So practically, the mandate was approved at the Council. So now, practically, where the game is not ended. So we are waiting for the trialogue negotiation that expected to be settled by the end of this year. There is a technical expert group on sustainable finance, TEG, on taxonomy. So practically they have to focus on a EU classification system, and they have other targets. What's the connection with nuclear here? That they accepted that nuclear energy generation is near zero greenhouse gas emissions, but they has not therefore recommended the inclusion of nuclear energy in the taxonomy at this stage because of their lack of competence to evaluate the nuclear life cycle technology and the impact during the entire nuclear life cycle technology. personally, I appreciate the honesty of the member of the group. I do not accept the fact that those who appointed them, they didn't care to sort this situation. However, there is a French initiative to create because also the recommendation is to bring more expertise. So now France, with the other pro-nuclear member states, they are proposing a sort of ad hoc nuclear experts group to bring and to provide the necessary information to settle that. Regarding the European Investment Bank, what I may say that the industry appreciate the neutral approach presented by the EIB for their new energy lending policy. Of course, that here is also a challenge that the document is not yet approved by the board because they cannot proceed until the new commission will be fully operational. Okay, so what we are doing? Now we presented what the others are doing. Foratom commissioned last year a study, a pathway to 2050, role of the nuclear in the low carbon, evaluating 3 scenarios, high, medium, and low scenarios, and practically evaluating the security of supply, sustainability, and economics. So this study is also referred by the communication, the Clean Planet for All. I do not insist on these aspects. A very interesting report was produced by Deloitte, also commissioned by Foratom, regarding nuclear energy, and it is a quite interesting report. They had the experience before that. They did a similar, I don't remember if it was only for wind or for renewable in general. So in 2019, now those figures are the last figures. There are more indicators, but now is not the time to go through all of them. 1,130,000 jobs in the nuclear industry, 507 billion EU in the GDP. And the prediction for 2050 is 1,320,000 jobs and an increase of the GDP to 576 billion. That is the structure in Europe. It is also interesting here that the second strongest industry is Germany. It's still Germany because they have a lot of companies involved in the nuclear business. It's Italy, and also it's Austria. They have some business in nuclear industry. However, the wind industry, 160 gigawatts, 250 jobs, and in the GDP, 36 billion euros. Okay, that is not to be very well understood. To be understood very well. We are not complaining against others. We like to be equal treated with the others. So this is why we try to put in evidence advantages of the nuclear in front of the other industries, other technology. But our strong opinion is that, as Mr. Stamboli said, is the energy mix is the solution. Energy mix of low carbon at the end of the day to the 40s, 50s, that's the solution. So fighting inside, against us, among us, on the battle of the technology is not the solution. So another important event we organized during the Romanian presidency of the Council, together with Foratom, we organized a series of events mainly in Romania and in Brussels. So on 25th of June in Bucharest, the 24 leaders from the industry, they signed the manifesto calling upon the EU policymakers to work with them to overcome the current challenges. That is an important. So now practically we are producing a letter to the new president of the commission. So we are continuing our lobby. Foratom published a series of position papers. Now is not time to go through all of them, but it is practical. We try to cover all the main aspects and problems of the sector. So now I'm close to the end. Is the key takeaways. So now we can start the next session soon. We consider that nuclear is and must be a major component of the EU policies and strategies, but it's necessary that to a coherent, consistent, and stable EU policy framework. We are talking not only for nuclear, for the entire sector, to agree an ambitious net zero CO2 emission targets for EU 2050. Sustainable finance need to be defined by evidence, not by ideology, because practically is there temptation to discuss very ideological. It remember me as a young member of the Romanian Communist Party, the long sessions with slogans, and now practically instead to speak in terms of with evidence, we are talking very ideological. So also there is a temptation on our side, but we try to don't do that. Strong industrial strategy, support human competencies, and very important, financing. If we are comparing the financing in nuclear fission in United States, in Russia, and in China, with the ridiculous figures at the European Union level, practically we will be lost in the future. So I don't say what Bill Gates says, but it's quite interesting, the statement of Angela Merkel, that quite jealous, say that Macron always has a little advantage over me because he has so many nuclear plants emitting solid CO2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chirica. Thank you very much. A very interesting presentation. No, it's all right. We started late, so we have still a quarter of an hour. Any questions to Mr. Chirica now? Yes, Mr. Chirica.
I'm gonna stay. Thank you first of all about your presentation. I don't have much time. Many times that I've seen presentation about nuclear, so I got quite a lot of information. But I'll stay in the one that you said in the last slide about by evidence, not by ideology. Okay, then, if we based on that, I'll ask you, you saw us quite a lot of work done by your lobby for promoting nuclear. Okay. Defending, if you use the word defending, that means somebody is attacking you. And in order to attack you, there are some reasons for that, but don't make it. Let's stay to evidence, not to ideology. You didn't say anything though, and I would like to have your comments on that regarding the research that you are doing to minimize the problems that make nuclear energy to have a gray, let's say, scale around it. So I would like to tell me, for example, what Foratom or general nuclear sector is doing to eliminate the nuclear waste or find ways or about the accidents to avoid that or whatever. In the area, technical, by evidence.
What you asked me to say practically is subject to a conference of 2-3 days, but okay, I try to summarize. Of course, that we are paying full attention to reduction of the waste. However, at the level of waste, our waste are very, very small if we are comparing them with coal industry, mainly. Practically, what is something that the people there don't talk, they have to talk is about the rare materials they use in the renewable. That is in the battery. That is a topic of discussion. We have to discuss it very honest. And also in terms of accident, of course, as I say, there are, I do not consider 3 Mile Island to be a significant accident. Was a matter of ideology, was a loss for the company indeed, because it was closed, but practically no releases outside. But of course that we cannot neglect and avoid to talk about Chernobyl and Fukushima. So there are major accidents, and we learn a lot of them, and we are improving from them. So practically, the rate of accident is very, very, very small, and we cannot compare, as I said before, casualties in the nuclear industry as a whole on the entire chain with the casualty in the coal industry and the deaths in mine explosions in all over the world where there is mining. So of course, nuclear is not perfect. We can improve it, but cannot be perfect. It's not a zero risk industry, but it's a less risky industry than other industries. So that due to the short time, I'm answering, unfortunately, ideological, not with facts, because I told you it's a discussion, very, very long discussion. Yes.
Any other question? One, and very quick, please.
So, would you promote the development of more nuclear reactors in Romania, for example? As we know, we already have two. Would you want to develop the other tools that already exist, but they are not in function at the moment? And how would you see doing this with a partnership with another country?
Practically, I am not here representing Nuclear Electrica, and I have no mandate to talk in the name of Nuclear Electrica. But he's one of the shareholders. You see, he's very critical against Nuclear Electrica, so he can say more. There's a friend of Nuclear Energy.
Okay, I think we have to conclude that. It's a part of the energy mix, actually. We keep talking about generation of electricity. Now, I think the next speaker has to do with consumption. And this is the most important part, because energy efficiency and actually consumption is probably the key to the transition.
So, hello. I'm very aware that I'm the only obstacle standing between you and the coffee break. So I'm going to be really, really short, and I promise I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll try to stick to. Sorry? Okay. Okay. So I'll just be very brief. We had a project with some partners from Visegrad countries, in which we were trying to see exactly the parts of sectors which are not covered by the ETS, and what exactly can be done about the reduction of non-ETS emissions. And we focused on only two non-ETS sectors, transport and buildings. We are covering 6 countries: Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, because we thought that there has been a lot of analysis in comparison with across EU countries, but generally the types of advice that one gets is that you should implement in Romania something that is done in Denmark, or in Bulgaria something that is done in UK. So maybe we have something to learn from countries which have a more similar experience to ours. So what we did, we selected a few indicators which show areas in which countries are performing better than others in transport and buildings, and we tried to see exactly what these countries were doing better than the others, and to what extent what they are doing better can be extrapolated to other countries as well. That's the basic idea. After that, we are now in the second phase in which there is a modeling being done to see exactly if the best practices from these countries are extrapolated to other countries, what are the forecasts of reduction of emissions, and whether we are on track with meeting the targets or not. So that's basically the whole approach of the project. And we identified some best practices in all these countries and in these two sectors. I think we realized as we were going along that since we selected indicators that were being improved after 2000, we found that Romania and Bulgaria was doing very well on emission reduction in the building sector and in the transport sector, but because we started from a very low base, because we hadn't done anything in the 90s. So it's actually quite an interesting finding. I'm just going to give you two examples and then we'll skip to questions. About good practices. So, for example, in Hungary, we saw that they have a very good program which deals with electromobility. And it's a very consistent program which looks at the whole sector. So they are supporting, not like we do with the Rabla program, subsidies for people to buy electric cars. They are giving much less subsidies, only 20% of the cost of the car, but they are using the revenues from the ETS to invest in charging infrastructure. And also they are, for the cars that are electric, they give some additional benefits like green plates so that you get an exemption for taxes. And they have invested quite significantly in electric bus fleets because it's much easier to deal with the public sector than with the private sector, and you also send a good signal. Poland has also done a lot in buying electric buses. They used 2 billion euros from EU funds only for that. And they are quite advanced with that. Slovakia is doing a lot in railway. They actually have increased substantially the railway network and the use of the railway for the regional transport. Now, in buildings, I think here we had better results than the other countries because Slovakia, for example, or Czech Republic have started their renovation programs very early in the 90s. So Slovakia, just to give you an example, is now thinking of refurbishing buildings which have been refurbished in 93, 94. And now they realize that they simply need to scale up a little bit the quality of the works because otherwise they cannot achieve their targets. They are actually the only country in the whole set that managed to stimulate a lot the investments in the refurbishment of single family houses. We have a big problem with that. Because none of the other countries have managed to do something about individual homes, and particularly in a country like Romania, where the large majority of households live in single-family houses, and they are actually in poorer areas. This is a big issue. So what I'm going to do is Eugenia will get probably and will share around the information and the presentations, and you will receive also the report that we did so far with all these examples, and they are quite interesting and very visual. And thank you very much. I think the applauses was just because I was short.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. You're very good. Questions to the lady? You want coffee? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you very much. Thank the panel. Half of it. But yes, we thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.